Listen, I kind of titled this section "The Guff That Biden Spoke" because I figured we can use the fact that Biden doesn't know how to speak properly, maybe piggyback off his, I don't want to say what's the word, his lack of mental facilities and his bullshit into what's really going on with this whole Ukraine situation, because it really should be, we should be standing up and screaming. People are saying, oh, these immigrants are taking food off my table and this and that. Well, the majority of our money goes to war, goes to the military-industrial complex, including Ukraine. And the reason why we have Mr. Zelensky here at the United Nations meetings is not because he wants to speak on behalf of Ukraine. He wants more money, more weapons, Don. Go ahead.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. So far, the United States has sent over that they've told us about over $160 billion since February of last year. $160 billion. So you could take those numbers that we just did for 1.7 trillion and divide them by 10. So each man, woman, and child in the United States gave Zelensky in the last 16 months or 17 months, gave Zelensky, and really arms manufacturers and crooks and oligarchs in Ukraine, each one of us gave them $500 in that time frame. Every man, woman, and child. Between us, me, you, and Jamie, we gave a $1,500 to Zelensky. The Ukraine has lost somewhere in the vicinity, more than 200,000 and some say up to 750,000 military fighters, and about half the population has migrated abroad. Much of it, by the way, to Russia voluntarily, because the areas that were being attacked for 8.5 years before Russia decided to intervene in the war that was going on inside are Russian people. Their ancestors have been there since the Russian Empire, before the Bolshevik Revolution. Crimea, the Russian military base, opened there in 1783. And then the people in the West, many of them came from Lithuania, from Germany, from Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, Romania, and they've migrated back there. About half the population is still in the country. The infrastructure has been damaged some. The civilian casualties in the areas that the Russians have attacked are actually not very high, considering there's been 16, 17 months of war going on there. The civilian casualties in the eastern part,
substantial, but still substantial, right? I mean, I don't want to. The fact is, it might be. Yeah, go ahead.
The media spoke almost immediately of a genocide. Since then, the total civilian deaths in 17 months across all of Ukraine is somewhere in the vicinity of 9,000 people. Now, just for scale, in the first 20 days of the Iraq War, the United States killed 7,000 civilians with their precision weapons. This is, you're talking something like 35 times as much time. And, it's basically the same number. Half of those, however, have been killed by Ukraine's military. And in the previous 8.5 years, 14,000 people, almost entirely in the East, were killed almost entirely by the Ukrainian army. This is the army that was taken over in the coup that the United States orchestrated, organized, paid for, and then has a hand in operating back in February of 2014. So, war is horrible, and death is horrible. And you have to understand what goes on, though, before you decide what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, here's the question then. What do we do about it at this point? I'm trying to raise awareness. Like I said, if I was in D.C. this weekend on Thursday, was Zelensky supposed to be at the White House, I'll be out there with a jester hat and some signs and some craziness. But, I don't know what to do other than, just alarming or alerting people or, just, being a truth teller and having a show and speaking this truth to try to get it out there. What do we do at this point, Don? You've been around for quite some time. You just talked about Iraq, how they went in there and they freaking set it on fire. Here we go again. We had shit in Syria. We had shit in Libya. We had shit in Guatemala. We tried to whack Maduro. This is all just recent stuff. This is like the everyday. It's like, what did Jimmy Dore used to say? They go and overturn a country before fucking breakfast. What are we to do at this point? Because I'm running out of answers right now, because it doesn't seem like the masses care as much about illegal immigrants coming into their household. Meanwhile, they don't care about the whole apparatus that's causing those migrants and causing death and destruction all around the planet. What's to do?
Well, for George or Jorge, depending on how he pronounces his name, for example, the question he raised, I understand that question. I'm here. I'm looking for work. There are people here, some of them illegally, others just got here, competing with me and driving down what I can charge for doing this work, because there's so many extra workers, basically. This is engineered, first of all. The people who pay us do this on purpose. They set us against each other. And the mechanics of it, if you mentioned Libya in passing. What happened? I was in Libya in 2009. And if you go to my YouTube page, I walked around Tripoli for an afternoon talking to people and showing people what actual life in Tripoli was actually like, as opposed to the crap that they fed us in the media here. People lived very well in Libya before the United States blew it up, bombing it for 12 hours a day, every city in the country from March 20th to October 20th, 2011. Barack Obama destroyed Libya in order to destroy the African Union, the possibility of an all-African gold-backed currency, and the ultimate possibility of African independence and sovereignty. Barack Obama did that. That was his goal. That was the reason he was placed in office. Because if you think you put him in office, you don't know how politics work. And what happened is that the country was so destroyed that now the dams and other things are falling apart. And the people are dying by the tens of thousands as a consequence of this. Yeah. And then people flee the country to survive, and they end up in Italy, for example, like we saw on the Italian island a few days ago. Thousands of them, because they're being chased out by death. And we sit here and reelect Obama the next year after he did that, smugly, and then wonder, what is this guy doing in my country? That's the world.
The Libya now has slave markets. It certainly does. It's crazy that happened. Like I said the other day, I went to an RFK event. He's still doubling down on his speak about the border and how we have to close the border because it's the humane thing to do, because the cartels are advertising every way to come in. I think the message needs to be close the bases, not the border. Here's the thing. You can try to close down the border as much as you want. There's other ways to get in here, fly in and never go back, all that other. There's so many different ways to get here, and they're leaving a burning building. They're running away from death. They're running away from destruction. So you can't do one without the other. And I hate to say it. Look, I know he's running for president. He has that message, and a lot of other people have that message. Obviously, Mayor Adams now in New York. Even The View says we got to send them elsewhere, right? But the sad thing is the lack of not talking about our foreign policy as a driving force to migration, people escaping death and destruction, as being highlighted as it should be. Let's play this clip from Joe Biden. We'll get into this too as well, because good old Joe, when our president speaks, you wanted to stand at attention and listen. Take a look at this.
Okay.
Cheese slice? You there, Cheese? Can you hear us? There you go.
There we go.
For the second year in a row, this gathering dedicated to peaceful resolution of conflicts is darkened by the shadow of war. An illegal war of conquest brought without provocation by Russia against its neighbor Ukraine. Like every nation in the world, the United States wants this war to end. No nation wants this war to end more than Ukraine. And we strongly support Ukraine in its efforts to bring about a diplomatic resolution that delivers just and lasting peace. But Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately.
Pause
And it's
that.
Russia alone that stands in the way of.
Russia alone is not responsible for this war. Let's talk about this real quick. I mean, we have to remind everybody. I know we've probably said it on our channels plenty of times before. Maybe everybody in the audience will know we've talked about this. The Convo Couch talked about this when we started in 2017. In 2014, there was an illegal coup backed by the West. George Soros was even a part of it, as he controlled a lot of the independent media that pushed for this color revolution. People like Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt handing out cookies on the Maidan. We had, Congress people, right? We had McCain, Lindsey Graham, Senator Murphy, Blumenthal, all of them, were pushing this over here. This is disgusting. And while people were dying and suffering in Lahaina, while people couldn't find a place to live, have not been given answers, need help, have been told they get $700 per household, Elizabeth Warren, Dick Blumenthal, and Lindsey Graham are in Kiev rubbing elbows with puppet cokehead Zelensky. So when Joe Biden sits here and says, hey, man, this is about Russia and Russia alone, your thoughts on that, Don?
Well, Jens Stoltenberg, who's the Secretary General of NATO, admitted this past week on television. It's on NATO.int website.
Jamie. Yeah, let's cue that up. Yeah, go ahead.
He admitted that the reason the war was there was that Russia said, we don't want you to expand NATO any closer to our border. And they said, we don't care what Russia wants. And if it causes a war, too bad.
Yeah.
And so they moved it. And then they had this revolution, quote unquote, this overthrow of the elected government in Ukraine. And they began shooting and killing the Russians, outlawing the Russian language, outlawing the parties that were basically consisted of the membership of the Russian ethnics in the eastern part of the country that were sufficiently large to have won the presidency in the last honest presidential election in the country in 2010, and started talking about joining NATO while NATO had been running war games against Russia in the Baltic states, which used to be part of the Soviet Union, in Poland, which used to be the headquarters of the Warsaw Pact, Romania, Bulgaria. They had an attempted color revolution in Belarus and an attempted color revolution in Kazakhstan. If they had accomplished, and this happened months before Russia went into Ukraine in February of 2022. If they had accomplished the takedown of the Belarus government, which they almost did, NATO would have been in position without firing a shot as deep into the old Soviet Union as Hitler was after killing 30 million Soviet citizens. The NATO would be starting this war from where Hitler fought his way into.
Do we have the Stoltenberg video?
We figured out what's coming.
Do we have that Stoltenberg video, Jamie?
Yeah, I believe the one we were watching was the Stoltenberg one.
No, we just was watching Biden. There's Stoltenberg was the head of the NATO was talking about. I'll find it real quick. Play the next Joe Biden video. I'll go find it real quick. Take a look at this because we have to. I mean, this was we'll continue to play this. This is Joe Biden once again, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the fact that it's Russia's responsibility. It's an illegal war. Russia only acting that stupid for people not to even realize that it was the United States who pushed for this illegal proxy war the whole time. Go ahead, take a play.
Peace, because the Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children. Russia believes that the world will grow weary and allow it to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. But I ask you this, if we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If you allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today and deter other would-be aggressors tomorrow. That's why the United States, together with our allies and partners around the world, will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and their freedom.
I paused that asshole. I had enough of him. I don't know who the hell's clapping.
Territorial integrity.
This is the Stoltenberg video. So this is the head of the UN, right? Let's play this over here. Let's see what he says too as well.
Of NATO.
Yeah, of NATO. Excuse me, not of the UN. Of NATO. These guys just show their whole asses all the time.
President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us.
Don, really quickly, has there ever been a promise from any world leader to another world leader that they wouldn't enlarge NATO? Can you please tell the boys and girls and the little children out there about one time one world leader promised another world leader that they wouldn't enlarge NATO?
So the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. And the Soviet Union fought back and conquered Germany by 1945, losing between 25 and 30 million people in the process of defending their country. At that point, this was the second war in 25 years where Germany had invaded Russia. And it was the second invasion by the West, by the way, because the West refused to help Russia until Hitler already invaded and started killing people. Since the revolution, because the US and the UK and France and Germany and everyone else tried to smother, in Winston Churchill's words, the Bolshevik infant in its cradle. So they occupied Germany up to the Elbe River, where the Soviet forces, who had liberated all of the concentration camps and took the Reichstag. You can see there's a famous photograph of the Soviet flag draped from the smoldering Reichstag, the German Bund Parliament. They met the Americans at the Elbe River, and Germany was carved up into four zones for the four allies, quote unquote: the UK, France, the US, and the USSR. The USSR's zone was the eastern part, which was logically the closest part to the USSR, and the western part, the three zones, US, UK, and France, which was adjacent to France and close to the UK, and the US was occupying that part of Europe at that point. And so this was the situation that existed. And then the balance of Europe shook out over the next few years with, as it turned out, everything from East Germany to the Soviet Union, ending up in an organization called the Warsaw Pact, which was a mutual defense military pact that was developed to counter NATO, which had already been created for Western Europe and the United States and the UK. This is basically the battleground for the Cold War that took place from 1946, 1947 until 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The rapprochement that took place, if you want to call it that, which is the way it was portrayed at the time, and I think the way it was perceived by the Soviet leadership at the time, at least the honest parts of it, rested upon an assurance from the West that the days of the Cold War were over, that there would never be a military threat to the Soviet Union or its neighbors again from the West, from Germany in particular, and from the United States and the UK and France and the NATO allies. And so it was agreed that the Soviet Union, which had a state on the territory it had occupied called the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, we refer to it as, and the three zones of Western powers, the U.S., UK, and France, were merged in, I think it was in the late 40s, against, by the way, the agreements with the Soviet Union, into a state called the Federal Republic of Germany, or we called West Germany. Germany was divided from World War II until 1989. And at that point, an agreement between the U.S. and the NATO powers, the German government that was then in Bonn, that is now the German government for the entire part, and the Soviet Union, that the USSR would withdraw from East Germany, thereby allowing a unified German state, which was supposedly the purpose of the whole post-war order, that Russia would never have to face a resurgent Germany that would yet again invade. But they allowed it on assurances from the West that this would not be allowed to happen. And then the Russians also ceased to occupy the buffer states between Germany and itself that had basically also contributed to the war effort in Germany. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, these states that were members of the Warsaw Pact were allowed to leave, to reconfigure their governments in any way they wanted, on a promise that there would not be an absorption of these countries by NATO, and then NATO placed on Russia's borders. The Soviet Union was dissolved, and I'm not going to go into the details, but in December of 1991, and then three republics along the Baltic Sea, it's in northwest Russia in essence, which are contiguous to Scandinavia and to Poland. Those three are now members, not just the Warsaw Pact, the entire Warsaw Pact is now part of NATO, and Germany, all of it, by the way, but parts of the Soviet Union itself, the Baltic states are part of it. They've been trying to get and had a war in Georgia in 2007, which was in the southern part of the former Soviet Union, southwestern part. And then Ukraine in 2014 was prepped from almost 1991 for this. The U.S. spent billions of dollars developing print, radio, television, and internet media that was entirely programmed by the CIA and the Broadcast Board of Governors in the United States, targeting the Russian ethnics in the eastern part of the country and Russia as the evil empire that had occupied your country since the creation of the Soviet Union, yada, yada, yada. It created a condition for a civil war. There were several attempted outbreaks of it. The United States not only intervened directly by arming and training and providing support like communications and radar and all this other crap, American officials were on stage in front of crowds in the western part of Ukraine, egging the crowds on to fight the police and to overthrow the government. And the organization of the government that took power in the aftermath of these riots that were stoked from December and January into February from 2013 to 14, that the arrangement of them was captured in a telephone call from Victoria Nuland from the State Department to
the EU,
to the Ukrainian ambassador from the United States. From there, within a month, this government declared war on the people of the East. Now,
Donbass,
the last presidential election, the president who was kicked out by this coup was elected in 2010. And this was the last national presidential election in unified Ukraine.
Yanukovych?
He was elected, if you see a map of the election.
We can pull that map up real quick, Jamie.
This will be the 2010 election map.
It's the blue one. Keep going, John.
Yeah. The people in the eastern part of the country, you see where it's all blue. The deep blue from top to bottom, absent the part that pokes out in the middle and up there, that is the part that's seceded now. The blue means they voted for Yanukovych. He's the guy that was elected president. The red means they voted for Yulia Tymoshenko. She's the one that lost. That they voted for him. So this is who elected the president that was kicked out. When the mobs in the red part kicked out the president elected in the blue part, by the blue part. The people in the blue part, or much of them, decided they were going to leave the country, leave Ukraine. First, what happened in 2014, at the very bottom there, that big island, that's Crimea. And in Crimea is the largest non-Pacific naval base of the Russian Navy. It's been stationed there since 1783 by Catherine the Great. Okay. When the Soviet Union was a superstate that included both Russia and Ukraine, when it was one nation state like the United States, the government, for political reasons, handed over Crimea to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, sort of like New Jersey handing over Bergen County to New York. Nothing really changes. Maybe people crack on each other because you've got a Jersey accent at the high school or whatever. But that's it. Meanwhile, the families that lived in Crimea have been Russian back to the 16th and 17th centuries, and they still live there. Well, when the government that took power, guided by the ideology that had been shaped by 15 years of $5 billion worth of U.S. media and Soros with private media, at least complementing that, programmed to hate Russians, when these people said, we're out of here, they started bombing them. They called them terrorists, and they said the Russians had occupied eastern Ukraine and Crimea. The Russians have been there for 400 years. They've been occupying it long before any of these clowns even knew what planet they were on.
Yeah.
And so
let me just repeat what Don said real quick in my cousin Vinny's way.
Go for it.
A little twisted. Everything that Don just said is not bullshit. It's the truth.
Right. Thank you.
Let's play the rest of this video. We'll jump right into it.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine.
I'm going to play it from the beginning. Sign that. It's just 2 seconds.
The opposite happened. President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. The opposite happened. He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO. He wanted us to remove our military infrastructure in all allies that have joined NATO since 1997, meaning half of NATO, all the Central and Eastern Europe. We should remove NATO from that part of our alliance. Borders. Introducing some kind of E and B or second-class membership. We rejected that. So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders. He has got the exact opposite. He has got more NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance, and he has also seen that Finland has already joined the alliance, and Sweden will soon be a full member. This is good for the Nordic countries. It's good for Finland and Sweden.
Is it good for the Nordic countries? Is it good for Finland and Sweden, Don? And this guy is just freaking showing his whole ass right now, as if this is a good thing. Really, to tell you the truth, I know that we have a lot of programming in the United States, empire education, where we make everybody think that we're just the United States, Captain America's going everywhere and spreading freedom and democracy. But this guy's letting the cat out of the bag. Does he realize? I mean, the guy that was next to him stood up and was like, yeah, I'm going to get the hell out of here as you expose yourself. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, how many people know it, though? I mean, the people that watch this program are very well informed, particularly in comparison to the average American, for example. Probably for a lot of people watching, and I understand it completely, this is the first time they've seen this. And then for some people that see this, for most people that see this, they don't really understand what it means because they don't know what he's talking about, because that's not told to us either. In December of 2021, Russia, looking at these neighbors, quote unquote, hosting massive NATO armies that were conducting war games from 2013 until Obama left the White House in January of 2017, and then picked up right where they left off in January of 2021 when Biden took office. Massive war games. War games mean the military starts coming for Russia, airplanes, tanks, guys with
Black
guns.
Sea bullshit. As soon as they got in, I want to point that out really quickly. What Don just said is so important because this is the whole part. You could talk about Donald Trump. Yeah, he continued to lay out the conditions which allowed the NATO to go and eventually poke the bear too much to force Russia into this move, which was probably Putin had no choice at this point. But as soon as Biden's people got back in charge, the Antony Blinkens, the Jake Sullivans, the whom I'm leaving out, the Victoria Nulands, the Jeffrey Pyetts, they went right back into anti-Russia form and started messing around in the Black Sea and whatnot. And it seemed like there was a different Russia this time where we had comments like Lavrov and Putin going, we're not going to lay back and just sit back down and let what happened in 2014 happen again. This time, there's going to be consequences. Go ahead, Don.
Or 1941. I mean, that's how they have to be viewing it.
Yeah, shit.
So all right, Russia has, it depends on who you ask. Like RFK says, for example, and he's, pretty knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff, that Russia's, and officially, Russia has more nuclear warheads than the United States. Supposedly, they have more delivery systems as well. I'm reluctant to have an opinion on that. I remember the missile gap that RFK's uncle used to get elected that turned out to be a fiction of speechwriters. But everyone acknowledges that Russia has, these hypersonic missiles to deliver nuclear weapons that are not, that supposedly the air defenses against these missiles are insufficient, that they're going to hit their targets, basically. Russia's nuclear doctrine with respect to the use of their nuclear weapons allows the use of nuclear weapons. In fact, pretty much promises it in two cases. One of the two cases. Excuse me. The first one is in retaliation for a nuclear strike on Russia or one of its allies. They have something called the CSTO. It's sort of a counter to NATO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It's some of the former Soviet republics, Russia. If one of them is hit with a nuclear weapon from the West, then Russia will retaliate with nuclear weapons. The other condition in which they'll use it is if there is a military threat and military action being conducted against Russia that threatens the survival of the Russian government and the Russian state. In that case, to defend, they will also use nuclear weapons. They don't have 800 military bases occupying Mexico, Canada, Cuba, Nicaragua, Peru, or Long Island. Okay, they have their forces in their country, and they say we're not going to spend our entire budget making defense contractors rich. We're going to build some bombs, and if you fuck with us, we're going to fuck you up. That's basically their doctrine. And so, what are we doing? But fucking with them every way that we can. Biden says repeatedly that the Russian government has to go. Zelensky refuses to talk to the Russian government until Putin is in jail or wherever the hell he wants to send him, to the Hague or whatever, which isn't going to happen. They've been upgrading the weapons delivered to Ukraine steadily since this war started and before, since really the coup in 2014, to the point that now there are missile and drone strikes inside Russia being conducted supposedly by Ukraine. There was an attempted assassination of President Putin or a decapitation of the Russian government drone strike over the summer that hit the Kremlin. There have been also attempts, just this past week, for example, an attempt to take out the Russian naval base in Sevastopol in Crimea. Again, the one that's been there since 1783. Now,
from what I understand too, as well, that they're gonna have a hard time hitting that because it's pretty fortified. But they did get a missile through that hit a sub and a dry dock, which I believe is part of the whole what they're going to say for more funding, because they're going to say, listen, you guys, we can win this. Anthony Blinken, I think he's counting on nobody paying attention to, but I think he repeated twice now the same city in which Ukraine is trying to say they took over, these little small pockets, to make it look like the counteroffensive is working. Therefore, they can justify giving them another $24 to $27 billion. What's this map about right here?
Okay, all right. So
while you're talking about Crimea,
okay, so Crimea is in red.
Got it.
The area in gold, or whatever, the dark orange part, those are the republics that have seceded from Ukraine and had referendum in each one that were approved 70 to 90%, depending on which one of the four republics you're talking about, to join with Russia. They are now considered by the people that live there and by the government in Moscow to be part of Russia. If you take a look at this map against that map that we had before for the election in see the blue there. Okay, that's in 2004. That's also blue is the people that voted for Yanukovych, who's the one that was driven from office by the U.S. coup. And the orange there is, basically what's left of Ukraine. This part here, only, I would say, most of the area has take a quick look at the other map. You'll see down on the sort of the bottom center. No, not that one. Let's take a look at, because those two are pretty much the same. Although, go back for a second, toggle between the other two for a second, because if you look at the top and the left, you'll see a couple of blue spots here. You won't see them. This is 2010. You won't see them in 2004. Go see that one? That's all orange up there. What happened in the 6 years intervening was that the candidate of the western part of the country was in power, and their treatment of the people in the western part of the country had some of them vote for the guy from the eastern part of the country. So the East stayed with their candidate, and some of the West defected to them for the 2010 election. That's the guy that was thrown out. So because they couldn't mobilize the voters in that orange part, they mobilized as many of them as they could and shipped them into Kiev and put them on the Maidan and had them seize power. That's what happened. And so what happened then was the people in the blue area, and actually only a portion of it, you'll see it's mostly just the southeastern part of the part to the right, those people voted to leave. The other, let's look at the one of now the referendum. You'll see that it's a thinner stripe on the right-hand side of the map. The
referendum one, the one that just has the Donbass and the Crimea.
Yeah, see that?
Okay. So what do you mean by referendum? What referendum are you referring to?
Okay, so what happened was in 2014, after this happened, first Crimea immediately held a referendum. And Russia said, look, we don't care what you guys do over there in Kiev, and we don't care what you're thinking in Washington and London. Because the UK, by the way, actually fought a war in Crimea trying to take that naval base, okay, like 150 years ago. Russia said, if you come in here, we're in the street rolling in the mud. So they had enough room in Crimea, and the population there is heavily Russian ethnic, to conduct an election, something like 90% turnout, and something like 92 or 88% in favor of seceding from the Ukraine and joining the Russian Federation. This was treated as an illegitimate and at gunpoint vote, but no one compares the fact that 4 years earlier they voted exactly that way. And they voted for the guy who wanted to deepen their relationship with Russia rather than join the EU and be forced to take IMF funding and other things that were part of the package that was being forced on Ukraine. They were taking it in like a poor stepchild, and they were going to milk it. And that's what we're seeing now.
Can I say something too? Yanukovych wasn't like pro-hardcore, hardline Russia. He agreed to do business with Russia, but he looked at that EU package. He considered it and just said, it is not a good deal for Ukraine. We can't do this. It's almost as if they didn't want him to take it so they can force what they're doing now today. At the end of the day, the West, especially the Americans, the foreign policy apparatus, the military-industrial complex, knew they can get Ukraine to be a proxy war against Russia. That's what they wanted, and that's what they got. Please continue, Don.
Yeah. So another thing, just for some background, folks, if you have a minute, if you're sitting in front of a laptop or something now, go to Google and type in the words decolonize Russia. Okay, there's a website that's managed by basically the U.S. government, the State Department, the CIA. There's an entity called the Collective Security Conference for Europe, whatever the hell. It's a product of Helsinki back in the 70s. This is the U.S. controlled part of it. And they have had, since this coup, okay, so their policy is the Russian Federation, the Russian Federation is a successor to the Russian Empire. It's built on the corpses of a bunch of little countries who need to be liberated from Russian imperialism. And so the Russian state should be dismantled and turned, they basically want to do to it what was done to Yugoslavia. That is exactly a prescription, if they are successful, for a nuclear retaliation. And that's the policy they're pursuing. You have to ask yourself why.
Yeah.